Hello everyone, welcome to my final Dark Side of the Ring episode review episode. Season 2 wrapped up earlier this week, and now I will be talking about the season finale right here, right now. I'll also give my overall feelings on Season 2 as a whole, although if you've watched my previous videos, you probably have an idea of what I thought about Season 2. But I'll go ahead and give my full thoughts on it anyway. Before I get into all that, though, quick video updates. My next wrestling-related video is likely going to be something related to Double or Nothing, which is happening this Saturday. I say maybe because I haven't decided if I'm going to watch the pay-per-view yet. And I've ordered every AEW pay-per-view up to this point, and I've enjoyed all of them to some degree. However, I feel like the empty arena shows... just across the board, it's not an AEW thing, it's not a WWE thing, it's just across the board. Wrestling without a crowd just doesn't work, especially long term, and I'm just hoping and praying that we can get back to normal wrestling shows soon, but I personally wish they had just postponed this pay-per-view instead of trying to barrel through and do something with it. And the card feels like something that they just kind of threw together because not everybody was available during the build-up to this thing, so they don't have a whole lot of big stories going into this. They just started getting guys back. Like Hangman Page and the Bucks just showed up for the first time this Dynamite. This is the first time we've seen them since all of this started. The Bucks were in the first episode, and I think they disappeared. And Hangman hasn't been seen at all. So it's we're finally starting to get some guys back. But at the same time, it's also, it's going to be an empty arena show, and those aren't very good. And in WWE's case with WrestleMania, it's like, all right, I've already paid for it because I have a subscription to the network. But with here, it's like I have to shell out of pocket to pay for full price for a pay-per-view for something that I know I'm probably not going to like very much because the empty arena thing just doesn't work for me. But maybe I can turn it into an interesting video. Who knows? So I might watch it. I haven't decided yet. I was really bummed to hear that Britt Baker got hurt on Dynamite this week because she's been like the best part of the empty arena shows across the board, and now she's hurt. It's like, oh man, she was the best part. But in any case, so I might have that one, and then after that, it's going to be kind of a wrestling drought because the only other thing I'm watching is the Undertaker Last Ride series, which has been good. I'm really enjoying it, but I want to wait until the series is concluded before I give like my full assessment of it. I've reviewed the first episode to kind of say, hey, this is really good. I'm really enjoying it. I'm going to watch all of this. But I think I'll wait until the full docuseries is completed before I give my final thoughts on it. And so I'm watching that right now. And Raw and SmackDown, NXT, I catch it when I can, but I haven't watched it religiously. And AEW, I watch every week, mainly for Britt Baker and MJF. Because they've been legitimately awesome. And Jake Roberts, I also watch for Jake Roberts. But even those, I'm like, man, I wish we could get a crowd back. It'd be so great if we could get a crowd back. But, Double or Nothing video may or may not happen. Haven't decided yet. And then after that, it's going to be a string of non-wrestling videos because I had other things lined up. It'll be my Crimson Empire Star Wars comic book review. The Thundercats video will finally be fully posted to Vimeo, and I will post a video on here letting everyone know that the video is posted and you can go check it out. So you'll be getting that. And I have another big video planned for the end of the month. That's about the coronavirus and what I've been doing during the coronavirus. And I think there's some interesting reviews and stuff I could do with that. So you'll be getting that. But so it's going to be kind of a wrestling drought after this weekend. So hopefully that doesn't turn everybody off. But that's just the state of things right now. After Double or Nothing, it's like, I don't know what I'm going to talk about. There's just not a lot of material out there for me in the world of wrestling, especially now that Dark Side of the Ring is concluded. And speaking of which, let's dive into that right now. Very appropriately, they ended Season 2 with the Owen Hart tragedy. They did not spend a whole lot of time talking about Owen's career. They kind of blasted through that pretty quickly, which I was okay with in this case because I think the situation was pretty significant, and so much so that focusing most of the episode on that part of the story I think was important. So them kind of shortchanging his career. If this was a 2-hour documentary like the Benoit one was, okay, sure, but you can go into Owen's whole career, but giving it like a 15-minute summary of his career which they really blasted through some things. They made it sound like the Blue Blazer was around in 1993, the way they jumped around. And I'm like, that's not true, but okay. They completely skipped over like the New Foundation and High Energy and stuff like that. But anyway, they blasted through his career, and then they jumped right into what happened and everything that went into setup Over the Edge 1999, and that fateful accident that took Owen Hart away from his family and took him away from the wrestling world. One of the most controversial moments in the history of professional wrestling, because as we all know, the show continued after Owen Hart basically died in front of a live crowd. And if that doesn't stop a show, then I guess nothing will stop a show. And it's one of those controversial things that gets brought up every so often as one of the worst things that WWE ever did. And it was nice to get like a full documentary here that presented Martha Hart, Owen Hart's widow, and his children's side of the story and how they personally felt, because I feel like their side of things often gets overlooked and not explained as well as it should be, because, and I think this is a wrestling bubble thing. You know, a lot of fans and a lot of people within the wrestling industry, there's this constant need to like defend wrestling at all cost and defend the industry at all cost. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact that wrestling, you know, is something that you kind of have to defend, where people will shit on the art form, tell you it's fake, and, you know, fans and people within the industry want to stand up for their business. We saw that in the Dr. D. David Schultz episode. And that, you know, it goes beyond just protecting kayfabe. You're protecting the entire art form that you love and enjoy. And, you know, if you're in the business, it's something that puts food on your family's table. So you defend it with your whole heart and soul. And sometimes they get a little overzealous with defending the business. In a lot of cases, I understand it. Here, it's like, I feel like in some wrestling media and in some wrestling fan circles, Martha Hart's kind of been vilified as like, oh, she doesn't want Owen to go into the Hall of Fame, and she won't let WWE make a DVD about Owen, and she won't let WWE do a proper tribute to Owen Hart. Although I look at things like the Hall of Fame and making a DVD and things like that as ways to make money off of Owen Hart. But but in any case, I think there's kind of like this tendency to kind of bash Martha Hart. And I'll be honest, from my point of view, going all the way back to when the incident first happened, I was always on her side, mainly because she's the widow, she is the mother of his children that are now without a father. I think whatever she decides, I think we should just respect the wishes of the family and just move on from there. If that means that Owen doesn't get to go into the Hall of Fame, I'm completely okay with that, because let's be honest, the Hall of Fame, it's really an excuse for us to mark out for the guys that we like. It doesn't really mean much in the grand scheme of things. I mean, yeah, when Rick Rude went in, when Diamond Dallas Page went in, when Goldberg went in, you know, I had all these guys I could mark out for. Kurt Angle, you know, marked out for him. Jake Roberts. It gave me a reason to like be like, oh, cool, that guy I really like is being honored tonight. That's pretty awesome. But I mean, I can also live with it if the family has a good reason to not want to put him in, or even if the family just doesn't want to put him in for whatever reason that they think is important to them. And in this case, I think she's completely justified, where, yeah, my husband died live on your show and you didn't stop the show, so I'm a little upset about that. So, and I want to know what exactly happened to my husband, and, you know, and that whole situation. So I really don't blame her at all, and I've always taken her side on that. And even if I disagreed with her, I would still have the stance of, can we respect the wishes of the family and just move on? Does this really need to be a thing where we kind of vilify her? And because even Brett, like even her own family, the Harts have kind of gotten on her case for it. And I think it's like, again, I think it stems from that being in the wrestling bubble, and anything that goes against what wrestling wants to do is seen as a slight against the entire business, where it's like, look, it's a grieving family. Can we just let them, you know, can we just leave them alone? Must we pester them? So yeah, I never had any problem with respecting Martha Hart's wishes. So it was nice to see her and her kids, even though it was heartbreaking to witness, them explain their side of the story and everything that happened. I guess before I go into further details on the episode, I'll explain what I was doing that night and what my experience was watching that pay-per-view. Owen Hart was always a guy that I liked and respected. I remember I first saw him when he came into the WWE as part of the new foundation with Jim Neidhart. And then he, not long after that, he joined up with Coco Beware. I was actually at the house show, or I like to think I was at the house show, where Coco Beware returned and tagged with Owen for the first time. I think it was. They announced Coco Beware as a replacement for Jim Neidhart. Let me put it that way. And I like to think that that was the first time that Coco and Owen tagged together, but it's possible that they had been doing that same bit all across the country, so who knows. It's probably more than likely the case, but anyway, in my head, that was the Coco Beware and Owen Hart's first night together. So, and I always liked Owen. I thought he was kind of like the, when the Rockers split, I thought High Energy was kind of like the new Rockers in that sense, where Owen was like the really cool athletic guy that could do all these cool things in the ring and have these exciting tag matches. I mean, the terrible hammer pants didn't do him any favors. Like, the look needed a lot of work, but Owen really caught my attention from his ability in the ring and the cool things he would do. And then that transitioned into his jealous brother angle with Bret, which I think is one of the best stories that the WWF ever did. I love that entire angle, and leading to a couple of my favorite matches, their match at WrestleMania 10 and the cage match later that year, and various other bouts as well. And that's where Owen kind of like came into his own. It's like, oh my God, this guy could be the champion if you really run with him. And, he had various other successful runs. I loved his tag team with the Bulldog. I loved the Slammy Award-winning Owen Hart. I loved the King of Hearts, where he won the King of the Ring tournament. I think the Slammy Award-winning Owen Hart, though, was where he got to show his funny side. Like that, what he did, it was the 97 Slammies, where he stole one of the Slammies and said, "I did it again. Woo! Bulldog, you might have 2 titles, but you don't have 2 Slammies." And it was super funny. And I think that was where Owen's like more comedic side that he was famous for behind the scenes kind of came out on screen. And, the run with the Hart Foundation in 97 was great, obviously. And then he did some stuff, like, I loved his stuff with Ken Shamrock. I loved the Dungeon match and the Lion's Den match that they had at SummerSlam. They did some really good stuff. And his run with the Nation was pretty good. But then after that, he kind of got saddled into a tag team with Jeff Jarrett, and they didn't really seem to know what to do with both of them. They just knew that Deborah was over because of her tits. And that kind of kept them over, but it wasn't like... It kind of felt like Owen was just there. And, as they explained in the documentary, they had pitched an angle where Owen was having an affair with Deborah, and which really doesn't make sense because... A, he's married in real life and people know it, but also because Jeff and Deborah weren't really linked romantically. It was pretty clear that was like a business partnership. So why would Owen having an affair with her like bother Jeff? Because I think that's where they were going to go with it. But so Owen shot that down, and then they put him in the Blue Blazer again, which was his first gimmick in the WWE. And I'll be honest, they were shitting on in the doc, and I've heard people kind of make fun of it. Say that it was a stupid idea to bring back the Blue Blazer. I kind of liked it. It was the precursor to Kurt Angle, where Kurt Angle was like the perfect insincere babyface. The 3 eyes and drinking your milk and all this other stuff. I mean, Kurt made that character work so well. And the Blue Blazer was kind of a precursor to that, and kind of opened the door for that type of babyface in the Attitude Era. A babyface who's really a heel, basically, adding more to that shades of gray element of the Attitude Era. So I thought, it was probably a bad idea, and they just did it just to give Owen something to do. But I thought, again, his natural comedic abilities kind of came through and made it work. So I was kind of okay with it. And then you get to that fateful night in Over the Edge 99. I was watching the pay-per-view, and the first clue that something had gone wrong is when they were airing one of the promos, and Jim Ross said something to the effect of, "We've got big problems out here." And I'm like, what does that mean? And then sure enough, we cut to the arena, and they're shooting the crowd, and Jim Ross gives his whole explanation of what happened. And then when I saw Jerry Lawler come back to the booth and the look on his face, I'm like, oh, this is bad. This is really bad. And I was kind of in a fog for the rest of the pay-per-view. The most vivid memories I have of the rest of the show, because that was the night where Steve Austin got screwed out of the title and Undertaker beat him for the belt, and literally nobody cared. Like, at that point, nobody cared. It was just very ghoulish and off-kilter show afterwards. My 2 vivid memories of that pay-per-view post what happened to Owen was the Jeff Jarrett promo where he was clearly in tears and Deborah was in tears, and it's like, why are we even doing this? Like, what is going on here? And I've heard that Owen was being wheeled by as they were shooting their promo, which Jesus. I mean, that takes The Show Must Go On to a whole nother level. And my other vivid memory is obviously the announcement from JR of what happened. And that I've heard JR tell the story before, but I think to hear it again in this documentary just really drove the point home for me. It's like, what's the you have to give them the update on Owen Hart. Well, what's the update? You haven't told me anything. Well, he's dead. You're on in 10, 9, 8. Jesus Christ Almighty. That's unbelievable. So I remember I was just in a fog the rest of the night. I couldn't believe what had happened. And I was in high school at the time, and I woke up the next morning, and I talked to my parents. I'm like, dude, Owen Hart died last night at the pay-per-view. And my parents were looking at me like, Pat, it's an angle. Come on, Pat, it's a wrestling thing. He didn't really die. I'm like, no, I think it's real. I'm pretty sure this is real. And I'm the guy that questions everything. Like, there's still a part of my brain that thinks Montreal was a work. Okay, like there's that little kernel in there that makes me think, was that a work? Was that a work? Maybe it was. It could have been. I don't know. It's a little coincidental that they were filming Wrestling with Shadows at the same time as all that was going on. So who knows? But this was one where I was like, no, I don't think they were playing. I think something really bad really happened. And sure enough, you open up the newspaper, a wrestler died last night. It's like, oh, shit. And the tribute show was one of the hardest things I've ever watched, which that was odd. They didn't... if I have one criticism of the episode, it felt like their mantra throughout the entire season was to make WWF look really bad, which is shocking because they got so much WWE footage to use this year, and they just made them look terrible. But this is one where it's like, they kind of made the WWE look like heartless monsters. I'm like, look, they did do the tribute show the next night. I'm not saying that absolves them. I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying it's like, I think their decision, or Vince's decision to have the show go on, was done out of ignorance and like that old school mindset of the show must go on, rather than any kind of malice or that they didn't care. I think that it was more like, this is what you do in wrestling. Somebody dies, you just go out there, and they just didn't know any better. And I don't think it was malicious. I don't think this case was malicious. And I'll bash WWE as much as anybody, but that was one where it's like, I don't think they were heartless monsters about it. But in any case, the episode goes into great detail about what happened that night. They interviewed a lot of the right people. Jim Ross, who had to call the show as it was going on. Jim Cornette was the most shocking to me, where he started to break down and cry while explaining the whole thing. And I'm like, I have never seen Jim Cornette cry. And if you've ever seen Jim Cornette, he's got two settings: laughing, bubbly, and excited, and his other side, which is angry, psychotic, and excited. He's got two speeds, and that's it. So to see him like break down and get emotional, I'm like, oh shit, this is something that's haunted a lot of people that were there at the time. And they interviewed D'Lo Brown, the Godfather, who was an interesting one because he was supposed to be Owen's opponent that night. And so we got to hear his point of view from what was going on in the gorilla position. Like, he was getting ready to come out, and it was like, Owen fell. I was like, what do you mean Owen fell? What? And so it was very interesting to get all of those perspectives on the WWE side of things. And that kind of leads us into the fallout. Now, listening to Martha Hart outline the phone call that Vince gave her that night, which is very telling to me that they were not watching the pay-per-view, which tells me that his kids didn't really like wrestling that much. And which kind of goes into where I think the documentaries, where my feelings on the documentary is going with it. His kids weren't watching it. Well, that might also be because it was the Attitude Era and they just didn't want the young kids watching any of that. But I still find it a little weird that they weren't watching the show just to watch Daddy or anything. But, who knows? But anyway, the phone call she got from Vince and listening to her tell that whole thing, that was like, I felt like a piece of my soul had been cut out. That was very, very hard to hear. And a lot of the stuff that they did in the follow-up, like her taking the kids up to the scaffold and looking down just to kind of get that closure, to kind of understand the full scope of what happened to him. And details like his fall caused like a dip in the ring and left a blood stain, and the wrestlers had to go out there and perform on a broken ring basically for the rest of the night. It's like, oh God, this is really hitting hard. I mean, this is real. She also told the story when she went to go see the body, and she went in there with Brett and had to identify him. And it's like, oh God, this is in a season full of tough episodes to watch, like really tough emotional episodes. This is the one that was probably the toughest for me to watch because it was just really hard hitting and emotional. And I think the good thing that came out of it is that I think a lot of people have a better understanding of where Martha Hart and her two kids are coming from when they say they don't want Owen in the Hall of Fame at all. And they've actually built like the Owen Hart Foundation in his name, and are doing good work with it. So that's one way to keep his memory alive and to pay respect and honor to him. And I think that's a good way to do it. And for me, that's good enough. I say leave the family alone. He doesn't have to go into the Hall of Fame. I think that's, and hey, at least the Owen Hart Foundation actually has a building with his name on it. So yeah, and again, I've always been sympathetic towards Martha Hart. Now, I don't know exactly what she expected to get out of the lawsuit, because I've heard her explain it also on Jericho's podcast, where she wanted, the day in court. Did she want somebody to go to jail over what had happened? I don't know, because she said the money wasn't what she was looking for. She wanted justice for Owen. I don't know if she was going to get anything else other than money, though, because I don't think there was any kind of criminal intent here. I think it was just negligence and ignorance on display from everybody involved that went into creating that. And one thing that was kind of missing, and I think they left him off because they didn't want to turn this into another Cornette Russo thing, but it felt weird that Vince Russo wasn't there because he was the one that booked Owen into the Blue Blazer gimmick. So I don't know. It would have been interesting to get Russo's perspective, but I think they left him off because they didn't want to turn it into another Cornette Russo thing. Which Montreal Screwjob, that's fine. Brawl for All, that's fine. Owen Hart, not really the place for it. And so yeah, I think that's the positive thing to come out of this. I think is that I think people have a better understanding of Martha Hart and her kids and where they're coming from. And boy, her kids really sound like they don't like wrestling too much. Like the daughter was like, "Yeah, wrestling took my daddy away from me when I was 3 years old. I don't like wrestling." And it's like, yeah, I mean, I fully understand that perspective, and that makes a lot of sense to me. And I get the feeling because they weren't watching the show that night, I get the feeling that they probably weren't big fans of wrestling anyway. Because I think maybe, and the doc didn't necessarily delve into this, but I think maybe there was a part of them that felt like wrestling was taking their daddy away from them. And then it did take their daddy away from them. So I think that leaves a little bit of justifiable bitterness towards wrestling there. So again, I don't have a degree or anything. I'm just kind of calling it as I see it. And so yeah, they go into the lawsuit a little bit. Like I said, I think they went a little too far to make the WWE look bad, because they did, like I said, there were elements where I don't think what happened was heartless on their part. I think it was more ignorant and stupid. And I will say this, though, they did bring up one point that really sold it for me. And I had never, all the years, we're almost 21 years to the day. Tomorrow it'll be 21 years to the day. I had never heard this point brought up before, and I cannot believe, I'm mad at myself that I never thought of it myself. But I think it was Martha Hart who mentioned that the show needed to be stopped so that the police could investigate what the hell happened. I'm like, oh my God, she is completely right. Because we all kind of assumed that what happened was an accident. And it was an accident, but you don't really know that. All we know is that a poor unfortunate soul dropped down from the top of the building and basically died right there in the middle of the ring. But you don't really know what happened. It could have been suicide. It could have been a murder. It could have been any number of things. And the show should have been stopped. Removing morality from it entirely, it should have been stopped just so an investigation could take place. Because once you continue the show, you're basically tampering with what could be a crime scene. And I'd never heard that point brought up before, and I'm like, oh my God, that's completely right. Yeah, the show should have been stopped just so a proper investigation could be done. Because let's assume that it was. I don't think that it was. I'm not suggesting any kind of conspiracy here, but let's say that Owen Hart was murdered. Let's say continuing the show would have given the murderer plenty of time to clean up his tracks, and it's unfortunate, but yeah, when I heard that, I was like, yeah, that the show absolutely should have been stopped, just for that alone. And again, not even right or wrong. It's just for the sake of the investigation, the show should have been stopped. And I would throw the right or wrong element on top of that to add even more fuel to the fire, because it's like, how can you expect the wrestlers to go out there and work? How can you expect the fans to sit there, who I'm convinced that most of them were sitting there just to find out what happened to Owen, more than anything else. And I mean, it was just a terrible call all around, and I hope nothing like that ever happens again in professional wrestling. And I really hope that, because, the whole rappelling down from the rafters thing, Sting made it cool. Shawn Michaels had an awesome entrance at WrestleMania 12 with it. So, if you're going to do something like that, though, you got to make sure that what you're doing is safe, secure, and the right amount of money is spent. If you have to spend a few extra bucks to make that happen, so be it. And apparently what happened was that they weren't satisfied with the first way they were doing it, which was safer and more expensive, so they cut some corners, and that's what happened. And they showed us the clip. Martha was like kind of showing off how the clip was supposed to work. And I would like to see, I would have liked to have seen like a demonstration of how that is supposed to work. Because as is, she's just holding like a piece of the clip and kind of like walking through it. But I would have liked to have seen like a demonstration of like how it would work, how the one that Owen was wearing before and like the one that Sting would wear is supposed to work, and how the one that Owen was wearing that night is supposed to work, just to show like how it's supposed to go. So that would have been nice. So it sounds like I have a couple nitpicks here and there, but overall I thought it was very emotional, hard to watch, left me in tears at several points, and an appropriate season finale to Season 2 of Dark Side of the Ring, which has been by default the best wrestling show out there in the midst of a global pandemic. So I'll sum up that episode by saying full love and respect to Owen Hart, his widow, and his children, and let's respect their wishes. And that's been my attitude for almost 21 years, and it's not changed at all. So again, let's leave the family alone. This is one thing where it's like the fans probably shouldn't get what they want, and I'm completely okay with that. But anyway, that concludes my thoughts on this episode. Thoughts on the season overall? Obviously, I really enjoyed it. I just called it the best wrestling show out there in the midst of a global pandemic. But I think even if we weren't going through a global pandemic, the show would be really, really good. I enjoyed Season 1, and I was looking forward to seeing what they would do in Season 2. The biggest improvement they made was using WWE footage, which that added a lot. Even though they made WWE look like garbage most of the time, especially the Jimmy Snuka episode. That was probably the one where they looked the worst, but it helped paint the picture a lot better. And I think Chris Jericho as the narrator, even though Dutch Mantell did a good job in Season 1, I think Jericho had a voice that better captured the emotions and the full scope of the story. So I thought Jericho did a great job as the narrator for Season 2. And I think they found some really good stories to tell. Like I said, the Dr. D one, I really enjoyed that one. The New Jack one felt like the profile of a serial killer. The Brawl for All kind of took an element of pro wrestling that a lot of us would kind of overlook and kind of presented it in a new light to make us realize, oh wow, this is really dark if you think about it. The Jimmy Snuka one felt like a Cold Case Files or an Unsolved Mysteries episode. That was probably long overdue, and maybe it's because it was wrestling that nobody felt the need to really follow up on it. So to get that story fully laid out, I thought was really, really good. And I enjoyed just about every episode this season. Like I said, the weakest one was the Road Warriors episode because it literally told me nothing I didn't already know. But when you look at the Benoit one with that 2-hour special that outlined all of it, just all of it, the New Jack episode, the Jimmy Snuka episode, the Dr. D episode, which is still my favorite, the Owen Hart episode, the Dino Bravo episode, and the Brawl for All one. They did a really good job all season long with these great little mini documentaries covering some of the weirdest, wackiest, and most tragic elements in pro wrestling history. And I would like to see a season 3. I'm not sure. I think most of the best stories have been done. I said this in a previous video where I got some comments saying they could do this and this and this and this and this, and I'm thinking, yeah, but like I've heard the plane ride from hell brought up, and I'm like, I pretty much know everything about the plane ride from hell. That one's kind of been talked to death in various videos. Although it would be interesting to get like if they got people that were actually on the plane to talk about it, that might be interesting. That might, and the other odd thing about the plane ride from hell is that I feel like there's nothing that happened on the plane ride from hell that I haven't heard a worse version of somewhere else. But I think the plane ride from hell is where every bad thing happened all on one flight. So you got like bad ribs, everybody getting drunk, everybody getting high, a shoot fight, Ric Flair walking up the aisleway with just a robe and sexually harassing a stewardess, drunk Dustin Rhodes singing love ballads over the PA system to his ex-wife, and all those other odd things. But it's like any story that took place during the plane ride from hell, I feel like happened elsewhere, but in like different circumstances. And the plane ride from hell is like the amalgamation of every terrible wrestling story you've ever heard. So that would be interesting, I guess. Brian Pillman has been brought up as one they could do. The one I would want to see there is what the fuck was going on the Raw after, where Brian Pillman's wife was put on TV to explain what happened. I'm like, why, Vince? And that's where, again, I don't think Vince is heartless. I think he's just oblivious and ignorant. And like, Vince, where did you think that was a good idea to do that? No, seriously, why did you think that was a good idea? Yeah, and they could probably do like a Jeff Hardy one would probably be interesting, especially, I mean, Victory Road 2011, one of the most famous pay-per-views in TNA history for all the wrong reasons. So there's probably enough material to do for a season 3. I don't know about beyond that, though. But hey, never underestimate the wrestling business. There's always a bunch of crazy shit going on. But anyway, that concludes my reviews for Season 2 of Dark Side of the Ring. Thank you, everyone, for watching. I've enjoyed doing this series, and it's given me something to do while I'm quarantined and not left with many options to go anywhere. So it was a fun series to do, but it's concluded now, and I'll just have to find something else to watch and to do. So with all that said, thanks again, everybody, for watching. You all have a good weekend, and I will see you all later.